There are moments in the study of human behavior and social institutions when one case, one series of events, seems to gather into itself the weight of many unresolved questions. It becomes more than an isolated incident. It becomes a mirror reflecting how individuals, families, and entire systems interact under the pressures of hidden illness, unspoken fears, and legal structures that sometimes falter in their intended purpose. Today, we turn to a case that unfolded in New Mexico, a case that began on an ordinary Sunday afternoon and ended with devastation that has reverberated far beyond one quiet household. It is a story of violence, yes, but it is also a story of silence, of untreated mental suffering, of gaps in oversight, and of the lingering struggle to reconcile justice with compassion when tragedy emerges from illness rather than clear intent. The household where the events occurred appeared to the outside world to embody peace. It was a family that lived without ostentation, on a property large enough to provide privacy, but not isolated enough to escape community perception. Neighbors knew them, if only casually, as polite and respectful. They were not people who drew suspicion, nor did they project volatility. Like many families who relocate to seek better lives, they seemed to embody the promise of stability. Yet beneath that calm exterior, one member struggled with profound psychological disturbances. These disturbances, as later evidence revealed, were not unknown. There had been medical interventions, assessments, and even a diagnosis. There had been treatment, and there had been prescriptions designed to moderate the hallucinations and intrusive thoughts that clouded his reality. But there was also non-compliance. There was denial. There was the quiet stigma that leads some families to minimize the seriousness of symptoms, attributing them not to medical necessity but to spiritual affliction or personal weakness. On that October day, the silence of a rural afternoon was broken by the sharp sound of gunfire. A neighbor, uncertain of what he had heard, initially dismissed it, then allowed unease to grow until it became undeniable. Repeated calls to the household went unanswered, and the absence of any response at the door deepened suspicion. Law enforcement was summoned, and their body cameras would later record the unfolding of a scene that confounded even seasoned officers. When they knocked, a young man emerged, disoriented, claiming that he had been attacked by members of his own family. His words were contradictory, fragmented, and tinged with delusional conviction. Within moments, he confessed to having taken lives, offering explanations that veered between self-defense, supernatural compulsion, and incomprehensible streams of thought. Inside the home, officers encountered the telltale signs of violence: stains marking walls and carpets, drag marks leading to the yard, and the grievously injured family dog. Following the suspect's directions, they discovered the bodies of 3 victims concealed outside, partially hidden but not yet buried. The brutality of the scene was undeniable. Ballistic evidence, blunt force instruments, and an attempt at concealment all suggested an eruption of violence carried out in multiple forms. Yet even in that clarity of physical evidence, the question of motive and intention remained obscured. When taken into custody, the accused alternated between lucidity and incomprehensible digressions. He spoke of possession, of seismic waves, of voices urging him to act, of grotesque visions that made ordinary interactions appear threatening. He claimed to have seen family members convulsing, expelling strange substances, behaving in ways that to him justified extreme response. To the rational listener, these accounts were delusions. To him, they were reality. In the controlled environment of an interrogation room, his behavior swung from passivity to sudden outbursts, culminating even in an attempted escape when, in a surge of agitation, he kicked through a wall and fled into the hallway before being restrained. Such conduct illustrated the intensity of his disordered mind, and it forced authorities to confront the limits of conventional procedure when dealing with someone whose grasp on reality had so thoroughly collapsed. As investigators pieced together the family's history, they found evidence that months earlier the young man had been hospitalized for psychosis. Records noted hallucinations, auditory voices, and grandiose ideas of joining law enforcement despite a tenuous relationship with reality. Medical professionals had discharged him with the conclusion that he posed no immediate danger, provided he continued treatment. Yet follow-up revealed what so often undermines psychiatric care: inconsistency in medication, resistance to acknowledging illness, and a household struggling to balance compassion with denial. Pills were found discarded, treatment was interrupted, and early signs were explained away as possession or spiritual struggle rather than illness demanding rigorous intervention. The tragedy thus opened a larger conversation about the intersection of mental health and public safety. If an individual demonstrates psychotic symptoms yet is deemed not dangerous at the time of evaluation, should they be allowed unrestricted access to a household containing firearms? Should there be a mechanism by which family members concerned about erratic behavior can request temporary removal of weapons until stability is assured? Red flag laws exist precisely for such circumstances, enabling courts to authorize temporary seizure of firearms when risk is evident. Yet such laws are unevenly applied, often poorly understood, and sometimes dismissed by those who fear stigmatizing their own loved ones. In this case, the firearm was legally registered to another member of the household, underscoring how difficult it can be to safeguard against misuse, even when the individual in crisis does not technically own the weapon. The legal system, too, faced a challenge that reaches far beyond this single case. How should courts respond when a defendant has clearly taken lives, but does so under the influence of psychosis so profound that competence to stand trial is absent? The principles of justice require that an individual understand the charges and be capable of assisting in their defense. When that capacity is lacking, trial cannot proceed. Instead, treatment in a secure mental health facility becomes the course of action, with periodic re-evaluations to determine whether competency might one day be restored. For victims' families, this process can feel like an evasion of accountability. For society, it raises the question of whether safety is adequately assured. For the individual, it may represent the only humane alternative to punishment for acts committed in the grip of delusion. Court hearings reflected this tension. Prosecutors laid out evidence of gunfire, blunt force trauma, attempted concealment, and even cruelty to animals. The defense highlighted profound mental illness, medication lapses, and the absence of coherent intent. The accused himself disrupted proceedings, asserting bizarre claims that the victims had expelled strange substances and that he acted only to preserve his life. Ultimately, a judge declared him incompetent to stand trial, ordering confinement to a mental health facility. The outcome is uncertain. Periodic evaluations will determine whether he may one day face trial or whether he will remain indefinitely in treatment. The broader implications of this tragedy deserve careful consideration. At the heart of the matter lies the question of prevention. Could these deaths have been avoided had mental health interventions been stronger, more consistent, and better supported? Too often, psychiatric care ends at the hospital discharge, with responsibility shifting to families who may lack resources or understanding. Medication compliance becomes voluntary. Follow-up visits may be irregular, and the individual drifts back into untreated psychosis. Meanwhile, cultural and familial beliefs may downplay the seriousness of symptoms, framing them in non-medical terms that discourage proper treatment. When warning signs are ignored or explained away, risk multiplies. Another implication involves the balance between individual rights and community safety. Firearm access is a contentious issue, particularly when intersecting with mental illness. Advocates of strong rights emphasize the presumption of responsibility until proven otherwise, while public safety advocates stress the need for precautionary removal in circumstances of instability. Red flag provisions are one attempt at balance, but they require recognition of danger and a willingness to act, neither of which always occurs in time. The sorrow of this case illustrates what can happen when gaps remain between recognition, action, and enforcement. Equally significant is the emotional impact on surviving family members. For those left behind, the devastation is twofold. They mourn the loss of loved ones, while simultaneously confronting the reality that the perpetrator was also their kin. The psychological toll of reconciling grief with betrayal, of grieving for victims while also feeling sorrow for the mentally ill relative who caused their deaths, is profound. Moreover, the knowledge that warning signs had been present but not heeded compounds the anguish, creating guilt and questions that may never find satisfactory answers. The community, too, experiences shock. Neighbors who had known the family only as kind and quiet must suddenly reckon with the fact that beneath the surface, turmoil had grown unchecked. Such realizations remind us that appearances are not always reliable indicators of well-being. They compel us to consider how communities can remain supportive without being intrusive, how they might recognize distress without resorting to judgment. From the perspective of law enforcement, this case underscores the unpredictable nature of crisis encounters. Officers arriving at the scene faced a suspect who was armed, unstable, and claiming victimhood. Their restraint in handling him without escalation was commendable. Yet their subsequent challenge in interrogation revealed how ill-equipped standard procedures can be when confronted with severe mental illness. Training in crisis intervention, mental health awareness, and de-escalation is crucial, not only for safety, but for the integrity of investigations. For mental health professionals, the lessons are equally pressing. Diagnosis alone are insufficient if treatment compliance cannot be ensured. The medical system must find ways to support continuity of care, to maintain engagement beyond initial hospitalization, and to monitor adherence without overburdening families. Community-based programs, case managers, and assertive treatment teams can provide the ongoing oversight needed to prevent relapse into dangerous states. Yet such programs require funding, policy commitment, and public support. Too often, they are under-resourced, leaving families to carry responsibilities they cannot manage alone. The legal outcome, though perhaps inevitable, reflects another limitation. Declaring an individual incompetent to stand trial does not provide closure to grieving relatives, nor does it satisfy society's demand for justice. Yet it reflects a necessary principle, that culpability requires comprehension. To punish a person who cannot understand the nature of their actions or the proceedings against them would be unjust. Thus, the system must balance two imperatives: to ensure public safety by confining the individual to treatment, and to preserve fairness by withholding trial until competence is restored. Whether that restoration occurs is uncertain, leaving the case suspended in a liminal space between justice and treatment. In reflecting upon this case, one must also confront the broader societal attitudes toward mental illness. Stigma persists, discouraging open discussion and timely intervention. Families may fear judgment, individuals may resist labels, and communities may prefer to look away. Yet silence is dangerous. Without honest recognition of symptoms, without acceptance that psychiatric conditions are as real and as serious as physical ones, opportunities for prevention will continue to be lost. Public education is vital, not only to reduce stigma, but to empower families with knowledge of available resources and legal options when loved ones become unstable. The ethical dimension also demands consideration. When an individual suffering from psychosis commits violence, is it accurate to regard them as a criminal in the conventional sense, or as a patient who requires medical intervention above all else? Justice requires accountability, but ethics requires compassion. Striking the balance is never easy, and each case demands careful judgment. In this instance, the decision to prioritize treatment over trial reflects a recognition that illness, not malice, was the driving force. Yet compassion must be coupled with caution, ensuring that the individual remains in a secure environment where risk to others is eliminated. One cannot overlook the symbolic weight of the attempted escape during interrogation. That act, born of agitation and confusion, dramatized the very tension between control and chaos that defines the case. It showed how traditional infrastructures, whether walls of a police station or routines of a courtroom, can prove inadequate when confronted with the raw force of untreated mental illness. It also served as a reminder of the unpredictability that officers, lawyers, and medical staff must navigate when engaging with individuals in such states. As time passes, evaluations will determine whether competency might return, opening the path to trial. Yet the tragedy already compels us to consider how systems must adapt. Stronger collaboration between law enforcement and mental health providers, greater investment in community treatment, and clearer mechanisms for restricting firearm access during crises are not optional luxuries. They are necessities if future losses are to be averted. Ultimately, what makes this case so haunting is that it was not inevitable. There were opportunities for prevention, consistent medication, sustained follow-up, family recognition of medical necessity, cautious application of firearm restrictions. None of these occurred with sufficient force, and the result was irreversible. It reminds us that tragedies are rarely the product of a single failure. Rather, they emerge from a chain of missed interventions, each small in itself but cumulative in consequence. As we contemplate the future, the charge is clear. We must resist the temptation to dismiss this as a singular aberration. Instead, it should be recognized as a symptom of larger systemic shortcomings. Families across the nation confront similar struggles, balancing love with fear, denial with responsibility. Communities face the same uncertainties, unsure when to intervene and how to respect privacy while safeguarding safety. Legal systems continue to wrestle with the line between culpability and illness. Policymakers grapple with the balance between rights and precautions. To learn nothing from this would be to dishonor those whose lives were lost. Let us therefore resolve to strengthen mental health care, not as a secondary concern, but as a central component of public safety. Let us support families not by leaving them isolated with impossible burdens, but by providing accessible, consistent, and comprehensive services. Let us ensure that laws designed to prevent tragedies are not only written, but also understood, respected, and applied. And let us cultivate a culture where speaking openly about mental illness is no longer taboo, where seeking help is a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. In the end, justice is not only about trials and verdicts. It is about building a society where preventable tragedies are truly prevented. The events of that Sunday afternoon in New Mexico will remain as a stark reminder of what can occur when warning signs are left unheeded, and when systems fail to bridge the gap between knowledge and action. May we draw from it the lessons necessary to protect others, to support those who struggle, and to honor the lives that were lost by ensuring that their fate is not repeated.